Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
Well, speaking of Google, of course, there were two items that you're focusing on today, David. Some SEO courses that Google seems to be starting to offer, and then also the whitespark study about the impact of Core Web Vitals on local rankings.
As I did last week, I'm copping out on my single item by combining two.
No, it's creative. It's a creative effort.
So I would actually sort of reverse the reason that this is all interesting to me. So that for those who haven't seen, whitespark came out with a pretty comprehensive study. I think they looked at something like 4,500 businesses across 15 categories and 15 markets in the United States. Everything from massage therapy to HVAC technicians. It was a pretty wide range of categories. And they analyzed the top 20 results for each of these searches in each of these markets for the performance on Google's Core Web Vitals scoring mechanism, which they have said actually influences ranking in organic results. And
they say page experience does, which is a combination of Core Vitals plus interstitials plus good mobile experience, a few other things. But,
I mean, the Core Web Vitals is as good of a proxy for that ranking factor that they've explicitly said as exists. So,
right.
So Darren Shaw and his team, I think Tomas Acuna was actually the one who published the study, analyzed these results and found that only 3% of these top 20 Google local finder results across all these keywords and markets, only 3% of those GBP landing pages performed well in Google's Core Web Vitals. And so this was interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, sort of re-emphasizes the fact that the local pack algorithm and the maps algorithm is a completely different beast from the organic algorithm, even though it's influenced by how well you do organically, looking at a completely separate set of criteria from the organic algorithm. So that was the first sort of big takeaway.
Do you think it's that, or do you think there just aren't very many local websites that are any good?
Well, this is what I would say. I would agree with Mike's assessment there.
I don't agree. I think that what I would say is that Google has a higher tolerance for bad websites among SMBs, but that this is such a tiny part of the overall organic ranking algorithm that it doesn't meaningfully impact how well somebody's going to perform in a pack result, is my read of the situation.
I mean, one of the ways to look at it is relevance is probably more important than prominence. This contributes to prominence, but relevance is so driven by location and category that value so far exceeds the value of prominence that this contributes that it doesn't show up.
Yeah.
The other way to look at it, I suppose.
Yep.
Which would suggest what you're arguing about the distinction between the two.
Yeah, and so this ties in though with another item that I happen to get as a Zen Business customer. So Near Media has used Zen Business for some LLC filings historically, so I'm on their mailing list. And Google is actually running what appears to be an SEO seminar that is hosted by Zen Business, where Google's own internal SEO team will be talking about how they optimize Google's own sites for better search performance. And it was interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, Google being very explicit about the fact that they are giving SEO advice under someone else's label, Zen Business, which we at local university, have worked with various Googlers over the years. And certainly all three of us have attended conferences where Google has sent representatives. And I think the representatives to a person have always been very conservative or cautious with respect to giving anything that could be construed as SEO advice. And this is a very explicit hook for Google to try to get people to attend, or Zen Business to be able to get people to attend this webinar. So it seems like a pretty big shift in the way Google is sort of presenting and packaging itself, first of all. And then my bigger concern, though, is just that the audience of Zen Business is probably primarily small businesses, given its sort of focus of its product and product set. And probably there are a lot of local businesses there as well. And I think that the frustration for me, and or potential frustration for me in terms of the advice that's going to be going out here is probably going to be heavy on things like make sure your page performs really well on core web vitals, and make sure you're sort of, optimizing your meta tags and your title tags and that sort of thing. And I think it's going to miss the boat on what actually is going to be driving a lot of rankings for these businesses. It's probably not going to talk very much about link building. It's probably not going to talk very much about reviews. And I don't necessarily think that it's in Google's interest to put these seminars on where they are not, they don't have a better sense of the audience and what advice for that audience will be appropriate. So that was sort of two things that caught my eye this week is that what we hear a lot from the sort of Google, from Google's mouthpieces about SEO doesn't necessarily apply that well to local search. And this whitespark study was the sort of latest example of that.
So I have one question, David. Are you attending?
It was, believe it or not. So I clicked the link as soon as I got it in my inbox. Now, I might have been on the West Coast and it went to the East Coast people before I woke up, but the seminar was fully booked. So, I mean, clearly the messaging worked for Zen Business to get people to sign up.
Well, we'll never know what the content is unless we follow up somehow. I suspect you're right that there'll be a bit of a mismatch between what local businesses need to focus on and what Google is offering, which may be much more technical advice.
I had a client reach out to me today. They're thinking of opening a new office in a new state and wanted to understand where the highest search volume was, the location where there was the highest search volume, but the lowest competition.
For their category?
In their category, right? Which is actually in local probably the most important thing is to be...
Very astute client.
Right. Where you want to be close to where the searchers are. Right. And he was in employment law and, it's like, I'm not sure when do they search at home or do they search when they're at work about abuses that their bosses may have taken part in? I don't know. But.
And how does working from home affect that calculation?
Yeah. It's a complicated question. That's for sure. But there are probably some general guidelines he can follow.
Well, but this is a good illustration of what enterprises have been doing for a while, using data, location data, online data that is sort of being generated to do things like site selection, and it's a if you have that kind of flexibility, it's an interesting strategy.
Right.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.